Hello, we are presenting on Chapter 9, Intercultural Communication Theories. To start, we're going to view this short video.
The world is becoming more and more interconnected, and people from vastly different contexts and backgrounds now come into contact on a regular basis, whether at university, in their work, or in other everyday situations. Most people assume that these intercultural situations are limited to when members of different national cultures meet, for example, between a German and an Indian citizen. The reality is, however, that every situation is intercultural in which we encounter a person who comes from a different context to us and who does not share much of our understanding of normality. While we're confident of the rules and norms of behavior in many usual situations, in many intercultural situations we feel insecure. This makes the intercultural encounter difficult because we don't interact and communicate in a natural way. In order to overcome this problem, more and more people are attending specialized intercultural training workshops. To enable the participants to become effective in intercultural...
I think we can pause this video here, and I recommend everyone watch the rest of this video for more information. It does a very good job of discussing intercultural competence. Back to the presentation here. So to begin the chapter, our textbook writer, Gudykunst, discusses a controversy. They haven't found the answer to this yet, of whether there is an objective real world between two different cultures, or if there is simply subjective views of the one thing we could call reality, the physical makeup of the world, history, situations as they are happening between individuals, etc. If there is an objective world, the idea would be like everyone's culture has us view the things within it from our own unique but also cultural perspective, and another group's cultural perspective would have them see the same objective reality differently. Thus communicating, you would have small miscommunications just naturally arising in that way. The alternative to that is the subjective view that there is no true reality, there's only subjective views of it. So two people speaking about the same things, in a way, I guess, would have trouble actually communicating about it because they're seeing it differently. So that is part of intercultural communication. The word inter is important here because we're talking about between different cultures. Okay. So we have a list of 5 subsections discussing different schools of theory about intercultural communication. The first focuses on effective outcomes. The second focuses on accommodation or adaptation, how individuals or groups accommodate or adapt. The third focuses on identity management or negation. The fourth focuses on communication networks, and the fifth focuses on acculturation and adjustment. The first we are looking at is about effective outcomes. These theorists are very inspired by physics and math, where we want to be able to predict the outcomes based on mathematical-like properties. So, for example, cultural convergence theory. Yes, cool. Yes, so the theory states in like 2 theorems. 1, in a relatively closed social system in which communication among members is unrestricted, the system over time will converge towards greater cultural uniformity. Theorem 2, when communication is restricted, the system will diverge towards diversity. To represent theorem 1, we have a glass of water with lemon in it. The lemon juice and the water are mixing, becoming lemonade. converging into one. On the other hand, we have vinegar and oil diverging. They never are going to mesh. And in this view, we have diversity, which is wild to me. It's interesting to view diversity in that way as a restriction of specifically communication. Next, we focus on accommodation or adaptation. One very interesting theory is the co-cultural theory. It is based around the work of muted group theory and standpoint theory. Muted group theory states that the society at large, the dominant social group, marginalizes members of that society in communicative ways. For example, if you go to an interview, you will be specifically speaking in very many cases. If we want to speak like bluntly, you want to speak in a specific way that we could say is white and also male. This is, yes, part of the muted group theory. Members who are marginalized include people of color, women, members of the LGBT community, disabled community, as well as others. Yes. The standpoint theory is actually rooted in a feminist theory, which states that depending on one's social position in a society, one views different things differently. This is similar to the argument of whether there is an objective reality or only subjective realities. An example that came to mind was, I think the best one, I hate to talk about this, is just the way that maybe some individuals can view the police. I think growing up, I viewed the police and I felt for the most part safe. But this is not the way that a lot of people in this country view the police and have grown viewing the police. This is an example of, depending on where you're standing, you see things differently. Okay. So co-cultural group members are marginalized in the dominant societal structure. Has to do with language, different language systems, and I forget the word, are basically seen as less than and are basically shunned from like different jobs and opportunities. Power structures doing that. The other side is that co-cultural group members will use certain communication styles to achieve success when confronting the oppressive dominant structures. If you would like great examples of that, you will find them in your textbooks on page 175, and I really recommend looking through the list. There is 9 communicative orientations in which different practices are used, and it's very interesting and worth reading. Okay, next is focusing on identity negotiation or management. To start, identity management theory. I guess these are the 3 that will be found in the textbook. But what is important is that within these, specifically in identity negotiation theory, is the idea that we use a system of 3 steps in order to negotiate our identities, to manage our identities, to reach efficient intercultural communication. The first step involves a trial and error, a process for finding identities, which can also be called frames of reference, on which communicators share some similarities. An important part of this theory subsection is that we are looking at how individuals negotiate their own identity to make these meaningful connections. What happens though is that, especially in cultures that don't learn about other cultures, we could think about the US as a great example. A lot of people in the US don't know about other cultures outside of it. And when confronted with a culture outside of it, what they have and what we see is they use stereotypes to try to interact with someone outside of a culture they are in which they're often unfamiliar with. The idea here is that it leads to step 2, if communication is like, if continued, is the you're basically learning things about this, like an individual and another culture, and there's an enmeshment of identities of participants into a mutually acceptable and convergent relationship identity, in spite of the fact that their cultural identifications are still divergent. We think of divergent, we can think to the first theory that we discussed. They are still separate, but there is an enmeshment of identities. I use the picture here of a mask as a symbol of identity. The masks match in such a way that communication can exist, and yeah, there can be a good communication. In spite the fact that both are retaining their own culture and still are divergent. And the third step is then renegotiating identifications, which we find here, in which individuals are taking the new knowledge and understandings that they have and are reshaping what can only be described, maybe, because I'm kind of mean, I want to call this stereotypes, our renegotiated identifications of how we can connect with others is in a way based on stereotypes. That get better and better is the theory here of identity negotiation or management. And this is a cycle that continues. We have here lemonade. Just to be weird, I will compare 2 cultures to lemons and water. The lemon still remains a lemons, the water still remains water, but there is better intercultural communication. And here I will pass it over to my presentation partner.
Well, thank you. Next is my turn to introduce our chapter. The Gudykunst also introduced theories focusing on communication networks. These theories are based on assumptions that individual behaviors is influenced by relationships between individuals rather than by the characteristic of any specific individuals. Also, there is a focus on the series of interconnecting relationships rather than static bonded group. These theories focus on explain linkage between people from different cultures. Well, as you can see, there are 3 theories that fit these categories, include the first outgroup communication theories, and the second one intercultural versus intercultural network theories, and the third one networks and agricultural theories. And my pronunciation is right. Well, Martin, please go next. Okay, thank you. Well, in order to discuss the outgroup communication competence theories, it is very important to answer the following questions, as you guys can see on our PowerPoint. The first question is, what's an outgroup? The answer is a social group with which an individual doesn't identify. And the second question is, what a personal network? I think the answer is a set of human contacts known to individuals with whom that individuals would expect to interact with frequently. And the third one is, what happens when you have outgroup members in an individual's personal network? Well, to answer these questions, according to the Yang Yun Kim, having a outgroup members in an individual personal network influence their outgroup communication competence. Kim summarized this with three parts. I think the first one is having outgroup members in your personal network facilitates outgroup communicative competence. And the second one is having outgroup members in central positions in individual personal network facilities outgroup communication competence. And the last one, the more frequent the contact and the closer the ties individuals have outgroup members, the more their outgroup communicative competence. Well, please go next. Well, as for um, this part argues that intercultural ties tend to be stronger than intercultural ties. I think there are two questions. What are intercultural ties? I think the answer is connections based on within the same cultural group. As for the second one questions, connection, the answer is connection based between two or more cultural groups. With these definitions, we can easily compare the term intercultural with the term outgroup members. We will now discuss why this is the case. According to the intercultural versus intercultural network therapies, Yang divides the following divided into following parts. The first one is intercultural network to tend to be radios. I think is individuals are linked to others who are not linked to others. Meanwhile, intercultural network tend to be interlocking. Individuals are linked to others who are linked to others. For example, in intercultural network, you might be making friend or friend. On the other hand, in intercultural network, is less likely to become friends of a friend who is part of an outgroup. The second one is intercultural network are more dense than intercultural network with more friends to friend connections. The third one is intercultural networks are more complex than intercultural network with more complex communications such as Jews, cultural reference, and so on. The fourth one is intercultural ties are more likely to be weaker as they tend to be more conditional and transitional, such as meeting with your hairdressers or other service versus an inanimate friendship. And the next one is and exists in intercultural setting more privately and of more importance. A bright link, I think, is members of one of clinics. Well, I don't know my pronunciation is right. Both service as intermediates can be formed interactive linkage between members of different groups. Please move on. Well, then the last part, Gudykunst introduced theories focus on adjustment. These theories are specifically focused on the agriculture of immigrant and the adjustment with focus on communication. Importantly, these theories focus on process of becoming intercultural. The three theories that fit in this category. The first one is communication and agricultural theories. A second one is a certain management theories of adjustment. And third one is communication is assimilations. I think I would like to talk about the second one. Written from the perspective of strangers entering new culture and interacting with host nations. This series uses Samuel's notions of the strangers. The strangers, in his perspective, can be defined as a person who comes today and stays tomorrow. The strangers is a member of the group that they live and participate in, yet they remain distant from other native members of the group. Social distance has to do with the person's original specifically. A stranger's distance is emphasized more than their nearness. The strangers is perceived as in the group, but not out of the group. Furthermore, when strangers enter a new culture, they have a certain certainty about the host nation feelings, beliefs, values, and behaviors. When strangers communicate with hosts, strangers experience uncertain and accented. If their certainties and stress are too high, they cannot accurately communicate it. Whenever strangers try to figure out why hosts behave the way they do, strangers are engaging in a certain reductions. Strangers must mindfully manage their the stressness. According to these theories, Managing uncertainty and stressness are the basic causes of strangers' intercultural adjustment. Okay, that's all my part. Thanks guys for listening, and thanks Martin's hard work.
Thank you everyone for listening. We're going to post some questions in the discussion board, and we're very excited to read what you answer to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.